today's conversation with Governor Rick Snyder in its proper perspective, we need to go all the way back to August 2009, when he was still a private citizen and unknown to the general public and the media, including this reporter. It was our very first meeting and his very first television interview as an announced candidate for Michigan's Chief Executive Officer. The site? Thomas Edison's lab in Greenfield Village at the Henry Ford in Dearborn. We met here again in 2014 when he was seeking re-election. And so it is only fitting that we return to this historic location today for his exit interview as a two-term Michigan governor. And later, my interview with retiring New Detroit President and CEO Shirley Stancato. From Thomas Edison's lab in Greenfield Village, it's Sunday, December the 16th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is a Spotlight Special. Governor, thanks for sitting down with us. Sort of deja vu for you.
Yeah, this is special, Chuck. Thanks for doing this interview here at Edison's lab. Well, I mean, that's where I started. You were first interview. It
was. I had hair back then, and it was totally black back then. 2009, yeah. August. And you made your announcement that you were going to run for governor.
Yeah, well, it was about reinventing Michigan because we were broken. Yeah. I mean, if you think about what tough shape we were back in those days and how divided everything was, I couldn't think of a better place to start than Edison's lab.
Well, you know, I went back and I looked at the show to refresh my memory, and you said, why did you pick Thomas Edison's historic lab here at Greenfield Village as the backdrop for your announcement?
I'm an entrepreneur and innovator, and I love this place because this represents ground zero in Michigan for innovation.
You may not recall, but when I asked you at that time why you decided to run for governor, leave the business world and run for governor, this is what you said.
It's relatively straightforward, Chuck. It's called 1 million jobs gone this decade. Every 12 minutes, a family moving out of state. 15% unemployment. Michigan's an economic disaster. It's unacceptable. It's got to stop. And I think the best way to make it stop is stand up and do something about it. So that's why I'm running for governor.
As you look back, has it been worth it? And do you feel good about what you've accomplished?
Yeah, if you just go through that list. We talked about all the job loss. I mean, 560,000 private sector jobs have been created. Our unemployment rate's 3.9%. We're leading the Great Lakes states in net inbound bachelor's degrees. Our young people are staying now. Detroit was the most challenged community for 40 years, 50 years.
A lot of that.
Now it's the comeback city in our country, and young people want to live in Detroit from all across the world. That's exciting stuff, Chuck. The other one is 600,000 people have health care today that didn't have it. These are wonderful things, and I'm really proud of that because it's not been about me. It's fundamentally, as I said, how do we make Michigan a better place? And not just for today, but a platform that can keep being better and better in the future for future generations.
You also said back then, Governor, that there are 3 pillars. You said one was the Great Lakes, restoring cities, and youth. You still feel that those are the 3 pillars that anchor this state?
Yeah, those are wonderful things if you think about it. I mean, the Great Lakes, we're fortunate to have one of the greatest assets in the world, and we've done some great things to help deal with invasives, other kind of pollution concerns, other challenges we face. Our youth, having them stay here and be here is critically important. I mean, that's so exciting to keep our young people here and then have young people want to be here. If you look at it, though, there are some new trends coming. I mean, things like mobility. I mean, we're the world's leader in an emerging field. If you go back to 2009, no one talked about mobility. Now it's one of the biggest topics in the world. But the good part is it's the transition of the auto industry kind of converging with the IT industry, and to say Michigan's the world's leader. And a great illustration is over the last year, I've signed agreements with the countries of the UK, the Netherlands, Australia, and China. Think about that. It's not with another state. It's not with a province. These countries believe we're a leader in it and want to partner with us. Isn't that a cool thing to think about, that Michigan's viewed in that light by places like that around the world?
I don't want to ask the question what you feel has been the biggest accomplishment, because that may be really hard to single in on that. But what perhaps was the hardest thing to get done?
That's a good question. One of them would be the Detroit bankruptcy. I mean, if you think about that, I remember when I went and said we were going to go into bankruptcy. Not a lot of people thought it was going to have a successful conclusion.
There are a lot of doubters, yeah.
Huge amount. I mean, and so that was something that, was a major decision that we followed through. And if you think about it, the part I didn't know was the convergence of people that really came from all corners to try to help. The grand bargain. Think about that. That was one of the great solidifications of our state. It was about Detroit, but I had UP legislators, getting behind helping Detroit. That was not something that traditionally happened. I mean, you've talked to people, that was not part of our culture.
Yeah. Do you think perhaps only a Republican governor could have gotten that grand bargain and that whole bankruptcy through from Detroit, which is a very Democratic city? It would have been a really unpopular thing for a Democratic governor to go in and say what they're going to do. You think that helped?
It might have, but you know me well enough. I don't think partisan. I just try to do the job. But in terms of perspective, there was a Republican legislator, so I think it was helpful having a Republican governor sort of rally them together to understand, because many of those folk didn't have the relationships with Detroit. I mean, they were other parts of Michigan, and so I think a lot of it was educational to get them to engage on two things. One, why it's right to help the people of Detroit, because the bankruptcy wasn't about money. It was about better services to the citizens of Detroit, because those are citizens of Michigan. The second piece, though, if you think about it, is understanding that a thriving Detroit, how much good would that do for the rest of the state? And it has. That has been something that's been a great benefit. Now that Detroit's coming back and doing so well, it's helping the economic outcomes for every corner of Michigan.
We just spent 2 days in Grand Rapids, did a show over there about what they're accomplishing. They're equally proud of what has been happening in Grand Rapids and the medical mile and just all sorts of things. The city is really, really changing. Those are two big anchors, Detroit and Grand Rapids.
Yeah, no, Grand Rapids has done fabulous. They've been a great community for many years, but they have really accelerated that. And the other one is, it's more than the city itself, that whole geography. If you look at the corridor from Grand Rapids to Holland, probably has among the lowest unemployment in the entire state. They're under 3% unemployment. I mean, their big challenge now is they need more people to move to the area because there are so many great jobs.
Biggest disappointment?
Well, it'd be Flint. Okay. That was an awful thing.
No question about it.
No question about it, and it was a failure at all levels of government. People made some mistakes that had a high price for all of us, and it's been a long process to come back, and learned a lot from that. It was very difficult, in terms of many of us in the state. But if you look at it now, the lead and copper rule we've done for the state, I put in as a regulation. We're leading the nation in being proactive about trying to deal with this issue that so many other places in our state and our nation haven't fully addressed yet. So it's like, how do we turn that to say, let's learn from this, let's be even better? The whole issue about PFAS, that new emerging contaminant. We are the nation's leader in that by far, about being proactive to address it, to understand it's a threat, to do things about it, that we have other states now trying to model after Michigan. That was something that we directly learned because of the Flint experience. So it's like, these are terrible things. Recovery is still taking place, but a lot of healing has taken place. But let's use it as a learning lesson to help us all, both in Michigan and around the country.
All right, we're going to take a real quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you about something that happened early in your administration and something late in your administration, and to get your thoughts about it. We'll be right back with Michigan Governor Rick Snyder. We are in the midst of lame duck session. A lot of people are angry with what's going on in the legislature. They feel as though the voters have voted, and now the party that is in power is tampering with everything and doing a power grab. Your thoughts?
Well, what I'd say is, for 8 years that I've been governor, I only talk about legislation ahead of time if it's something I've proposed. I respect the legislature. What they're doing is something I'm waiting to see what they pass. It will come to my desk, many of these bills, and I'll look at each bill independently and thoughtfully. without a partisan lens. My goal is to do good public policy for the state of Michigan.
You'll be very nonpartisan in that role.
Well, I've got a track record to prove it.
Yeah.
So my goal is to say, how can I do what I believe is best for the people of Michigan, looking at both the short and long term, and I'll evaluate every bill I get. And I do that with every single act, and I've signed over 3,000 in my day. So I'm going to look at this carefully.
You are prepared, though, to use the power of the veto should you feel it's necessary.
I've done it in the past.
And you'll do it again if you feel it's necessary.
Again, I do what I believe will be best for the people of Michigan.
Long term, what do you think is going to do more for Michigan? What happened in terms of right to work or your Marshall Plan?
Marshall Plan.
No question about it.
Yeah, because it's about giving people an opportunity to get the skills they need to have great, well-paying careers. And it's transformational. This is something that the right to work was, what it really did was get the world to understand Michigan's open for business. Yeah. And that was important, Chuck. So it was an important thing that we did. But the Marshall Plan, there is going to be a massive transformation in how we educate, how the educational community has to partner with the employer community, working together to do competency-based learning, certificate-based learning, lifelong learning. And Michigan is on the forefront of leading that charge in our nation.
Years ago, I went up to Traverse City. I interviewed Governor Milliken. It was the first time Governor Milliken admitted that he voted for Barack Obama for president. He said, "I'm not leaving my party. I'm a diehard Republican. I'm going to stay there."
So, Governor, would it be safe to make the assumption that you voted for Senator Barack Obama?
I did not make any public endorsements, but I will tell you directly and honestly that I voted. I voted for Senator Obama for president. And I have no regrets about having done that. I felt that he was far and away, as the campaign unfolded and neared the end, he was far and away the best person to lead this country in very critical and dangerous times.
As you look back on this recent election, is Rick Snyder disappointed in the outcome, or perhaps did the best person win? Not given the choice, Bill Schuette, Gretchen, I know you wanted Callie, but when it came down to those two people.
Well, what I'd say is I was planning and I am doing a great transition with whoever won. Again, I know you want an answer to the question, but as a practical matter, yeah, as governor, I don't view that as something that's best for me to answer. I have my personal feelings, I have my strong feelings on that, but as a practical matter, my goal is to make sure we have good governance in the state. And the good part is the transition's going well. The governor-elect has been very thoughtful about the questions she's asking, the dialogue we're having, and I hope we've got something exciting to continue on the path. For all the things we put in place, there's much more good side and upside to go if we stay on a similar path.
When Spotlight returns from Greenfield Village, Rick Snyder talks about his legacy. We'll be right back.
How do you want historians to remember Rick Snyder's term in office?
It goes back to when we started. I told you how I wanted to be judged. Two things. One, did I do what I said I was going to do? And secondly, did I build a long-term foundation for success that had nothing to do about Rick Snyder? This isn't about me. This was to say, have we created an environment now that can be built on by Governor-elect Whitmer, by governors after her, to say we've got a foundation now that can go for 20, 30, 40 years and be really strong and longer for our kids in their future. Because I have that comment. You've heard me say it many times. If you want a really cool job, run for governor in 2038, because we've done things today that are awesome in 2038.
Yeah. All right, Governor.
Thanks.
Happy holidays to you.
Thank you.
What are you cooking this year?
This year, I'm still waiting for the family vote. We're a little early, but it could be a turkey to a roast, but I will be cooking.
But there's still time for them to lobby.
There's still time for lobbying that we may have a lame duck session about what to cook for Christmas for the family.
But you're not going to get off the hook. You know you got to cook something, right?
I'm fired up to cook. That's my therapy.
All right. And Mrs. Snyder is ready to travel?
She's ready to vacation. So when people ask what I'm doing next, it's whatever Sue says.
All right. Governor, best of holidays to you and your family.
Happy
and
holidays.
Thanks so much for being accessible for all these years.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
And coming up,
we'll talk to another person who is stepping down from their current position and sort of easing into some form of retirement. Shirley Stancato, she is the president and CEO of New Detroit. We'll go downtown and talk to her from the Cube. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Spotlight. We've changed locations downtown here at the Cube, our home away from home. And joining me now is a person who's been on this program too many times for me to count, Shirley Stancato, president and CEO of New Detroit. Welcome back to Spotlight.
Thank you, glad to be here.
19 years, and you say it's time to give it up.
Be 19 years in February, but it's time, yeah.
Why now?
You know, there are a lot of reasons. You don't come up with one specific reason, but in terms of, we've done 3 strategic plans since I've been there, okay? A lot has changed in terms of what's happening in the city and the relationships between folks. And from that perspective, a lot of newer folks coming into the community, making a difference. And so from that perspective, it's time for me to at least move away from this job. Don't have another job. Okay. But, you know, to retire.
Okay, all right. But if I know you, you're going to keep your fingers in something, probably some boards and some other stuff. Yeah. I don't see you just sitting back in a rocking chair.
Well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I am on several boards, and I'm going to stay on those boards. I've also been asked, since I announced my retirement, to be on several boards, so I have to make sure I balance that.
That's the way it always is. Yeah.
But you know, when I think about it, this work really isn't just work. It's a part of now of who I am. Really, the mission has become my personal mission. And you know, recently in recent events around the world, particularly in the synagogue, the shooting in the synagogue here, I was reading part of the Talmud, and the translation of it goes something like this. It says, "Don't be daunted by the enormity of the ugliness in the world," if you will. I'm paraphrasing. It said, you know, speak now, act now, walk humbly now. But then the part that gets me, it says, you know, you are not required to complete the work, neither are you free to abandon it. And so from the perspective, there's lots of work that needs to be done, and so that's going to be done under the structure of New Detroit. But I clearly won't abandon racial justice work in any way.
Search committee is already underway to find the new leader.
Search committee, search firm underway, and there are a lot of great people in Metropolitan Detroit that could fill this position.
You know what the mission of New Detroit was when you first got involved and when it was first founded, before you even became the president and CEO. Has that changed drastically from what needs to be done today for an organization like that? And some would even say, is the organization still needed?
Well, the mission really is relatively the same, to work on achieving racial understanding and racial justice in Metropolitan Detroit. That was the mission from the beginning, thinking about Detroit, but clearly the region. People don't know that New Detroit was started by regional leadership. It's a leadership organization. But the issues that we address, while they are still around racial justice, they're different, but we still need this work. You know, in New Detroit, we look at the gap. People talk about, you know, things are getting better. So for example, recently there in the newspaper, there was something that said that African-American unemployment is at an all-time low. But Chuck, it is still twice as much as it is for whites. And so we look at that gap, you know, income in the United States. In the United States, the gap between African-American income and white income is the same today as it was 50 years ago. So we really, really have lots of work to do around institutional racism, institutional change, structural racism to close the gap.
What do you see as the biggest accomplishment during the time that you were at New Detroit, whether it was personal or it was the organization itself?
Well, it's really difficult for me to talk about accomplishments, but I think the fact that we can now, I'd say, use the 4-letter word race, that people are talking about race in a way that they never have in the past. And so oftentimes folks say, well, I want to do something. Before it was
kind of whispered.
Yeah, you're talking, it's always the elephant in the room in Southeast Michigan. But now people talk about it, and people say, you know, Shirley, I want to do something. I don't want to talk. But what we say at New Detroit is, talking is the first step. That's the important step toward coming to any kind of resolution about any issues that we have. So the leadership in this community is still committed to closing the gap around race, and they really are focused on maybe doing it in a different way, but focusing on being thought leaders around this whole idea of racial justice and racial equity.
Transportation, is that still one tough nut?
One of the things I've said is that the reason we do not have rapid transit in our community, is related to race. You know, lots of conversation about, you know, I don't want whomever that is to get off of a bus or get off of whatever it is in my neighborhood. And there's still all kinds of issues, disagreements about what should happen and how we should do it. But it is clearly one of the big issues that we have in our community, and I think, I do believe that race is at the center of it.
As one of the leading women leaders in this region, and you just watched what happened in this election, your thoughts and what do you think that says about where this region and where this state is as leadership change is in transition right now?
Well, you know, I think that people, if you take individual people, and I'm talking about the system and the structure, people are looking at who is the best person for the job, and if that person happens to be a woman, then we're going to vote for that person. So from my perspective, it's people opening up their minds and having conversations about what should happen, who's the best person to lead this community. And so regardless of gender, and not just from a gender perspective, but an African-American, very first African-American lieutenant governor, that's really, really big for our community. And so I'm really proud of the facts that folks are voting, and they're voting based upon what they think we need to do in our community for change.
You started your career in banking, NBD, had a whole career, very good career there before they plucked you out and said, hey, need you to lead New Detroit. As you look at the banking world and the influence that banking has had on what we're going through in Detroit right now, you're proud of the banking industry and feel like it has really stepped up to the plate?
Well, I'm proud in so many ways. Proud of the fact that if you look at all of the initiatives that are involved around it, microloans and grants that very small businesses are doing, you will find at the center of those a bank. And not every single bank, but a bank that's focused on we know what we need to do. The banking industry is saying, look, in order for us to be successful, then the community where we abide needs to be successful too. So there's a lot of great initiatives going on. You see them. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to develop products that folks can use. So I think you'll see more, and I really am pleased with how things are going. Now, that doesn't mean that I think it's perfect. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We talk about home ownership and the mortgage issue. So those are pieces of the puzzle that really we need to put in place also. But in the long run, I think we really are headed in the right direction.
Shirley Stancato, final question. You optimistic about Detroit and Southeast Michigan and where we're headed?
I am always a glass half full person. And so I am clearly optimistic about where we're headed. All the young people who are here and looking at what's going on in our community, absolutely optimistic.
All right. Best of luck in retirement.
Thank you very much.
Stay in touch with us.
I will. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be around.
Okay. All right. All right. And if a new job comes along too, you let us know about that as well. It's time to play with the grandkids, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.